How did a routine workday in Los Angeles turn into one of the biggest domestic confrontations in America in 2025? On the morning of June 6th, thousands of people across Los Angeles were heading to work just like any other day. Construction workers gathered near parking lots looking for jobs. Employees arrived at garment factories in the fashion district. Store owners opened their businesses. For most residents, it seemed like an ordinary Friday. But within a few hours, that normal day would transform into a national story involving immigration raids, mass protests, National Guard troops, Marines, curfews, and a political battle that would spread far beyond California. The events began when federal immigration agents launched a series of enforcement operations across Los Angeles. One of the most talked about locations was a Home Depot area where day laborers often gather in search of temporary work. Another major operation took place in the Fashion District, a neighborhood filled with clothing manufacturers and immigrant workers. As news of the raids spread, witnesses reportedly began shouting a warning heard in immigrant communities for decades. La Migra. It is a phrase used to alert people that immigration officers are nearby. Within minutes, crowds started forming. Videos showed people gathering outside workplaces where federal agents were conducting operations. Some protesters attempted to block vehicles leaving the scene. Others demanded information about friends, family members, and co-workers who had been detained. At first, the demonstrations were relatively small, but what happened next would change the scale of the story entirely. By the afternoon, hundreds of protesters had gathered near federal facilities in downtown Los Angeles. The focus quickly shifted from the immigration raids themselves to a larger question. Had the federal government gone too far? As evening approached, tensions began to rise. Authorities declared an unlawful assembly around some protest locations. Police moved in to disperse crowds. Protesters refused to leave. Flashbang devices, tear gas, and less lethal projectiles were used as confrontations intensified. For many residents watching the situation unfold, the images were shocking. This was not taking place at the southern border. It was happening in the middle of Los Angeles. And the story was only beginning. The following day, June 7th, demonstrations expanded beyond downtown. Reports of additional immigration activity near Paramount and surrounding communities attracted even larger crowds. Protesters, activists, local residents, and community organizations began organizing rapidly. Social media played a major role. Videos spread across the country within hours. Images of federal agents, protesters, and confrontations appeared on millions of screens. What had started as local immigration enforcement was now becoming national news. According to federal officials, the operations were part of broader immigration enforcement efforts. Supporters argued that the government was simply enforcing existing laws. Critics saw something very different. Many community members believed the operations created fear among families and workers who had lived in the area for years. Business owners worried customers would stop coming. Parents worried about family members who might not return home that night. In neighborhoods with large immigrant populations, uncertainty spread quickly. Nobody seemed to know exactly how far the enforcement actions would go. Then came the moment that elevated the story from a local controversy to a national confrontation. President Donald Trump ordered the deployment of National Guard troops to Los Angeles. Suddenly, the debate was no longer only about immigration. It became a debate about federal power. The decision triggered immediate reactions from state and city leaders. Supporters argued that additional forces were necessary to maintain order and protect federal facilities. Opponents argued that local authorities were already managing the situation and that sending troops would only increase tensions. For ordinary Americans watching from home, the images were difficult to ignore. National Guard personnel standing near federal buildings, rows of officers in protective gear, crowds chanting in the streets, helicopters flying overhead. The scenes looked unlike anything many younger Americans had witnessed in their lifetime. And yet, for older residents of Los Angeles, the images brought back memories. Some remembered the unrest of 1992. Others remembered major immigration marches that had taken place years earlier. Los Angeles has long been a city where questions about immigration, identity, and government authority intersect. This was another chapter in that history. As the days continued, the situation escalated further. Additional National Guard troops were deployed. Reports emerged that hundreds of Marines were also being mobilized to support federal operations. The numbers grew into the thousands. By this point, the story had become impossible to separate from politics. But behind the political arguments were real people whose lives had been disrupted. Workers who had gone to their jobs that morning, families searching for detained relatives, business owners losing customers, communities trying to understand what was happening around them. One of the most powerful aspects of the story was not what happened in government offices or courtrooms. It was what happened in neighborhoods. In the fashion district, many businesses reportedly experienced immediate declines in activity. Customers stayed away. Workers became fearful. Some business owners later said sales dropped dramatically after the raids. For families, the uncertainty was often worse than the news itself. When a loved one is detained, many questions remain unanswered. Where are they? Can they make a phone call? How long will they be held? What happens next? Those questions became part of daily life for many affected families. Meanwhile, protests continued. Most demonstrations remained peaceful. However, some incidents involved vandalism, property damage, projectiles thrown at law enforcement, and clashes between protesters and police. Those incidents became the focus of national headlines. Supporters of the federal response pointed to those scenes as evidence that stronger security measures were necessary. Critics argued that the military presence itself was contributing to the escalation. The debate grew louder each day. Who was responsible? Who had overreacted? Could the situation have been handled differently? By June 10th, Los Angeles officials imposed a downtown curfew in an effort to restore order. For one of America's largest and most famous cities, the sight of curfew announcements felt extraordinary. The city, known for Hollywood, beaches, and entertainment, was now appearing in international headlines because of immigration raids and military deployments. Yet perhaps the most important part of this story is not the protests themselves. It is what happened afterward. Long after television cameras moved on, many communities continued dealing with the consequences. Businesses reported lasting economic damage. Families remained separated. Some residents became increasingly fearful of interacting with authorities. Others felt the events exposed deeper tensions that had existed for years beneath the surface. The effects continued long after the crowds disappeared from the streets. And that raises a larger question. What happens when immigration enforcement moves from the border into the daily life of a major American city? For supporters, the answer is straightforward. The law must be enforced. For critics, the answer is equally clear. Communities are damaged when fear becomes part of everyday life. But regardless of where someone stands politically, one fact remains undeniable. The events of June 2025 transformed Los Angeles into the center of a national debate about immigration, protest, federal authority, and civil liberties. A Home Depot parking lot, a garment factory, a federal building. Ordinary locations suddenly became symbols in a conflict that captured the attention of the entire country. And perhaps that is why the story continues to resonate, because at its core, it is not simply a story about immigration. It is a story about what happens when government power, public resistance, and human lives collide in one of the world's most famous cities. And on a normal morning in June, Los Angeles became the place where that collision unfolded in front of the entire world.